On the.
Well, I want you to, and then that's what he can do.
That's fine. No problem. They know who I am. I gotta clean up a little bit of the power stuff and add some, do about an hour here and then just open sessions regarding the staff questions. Okay. I realize that. It was I saw I do. Just runs the squad. Alrighty. Thanks for doing this. No problem, guys. We'll get going. I know people come in. Yeah. Alright. Thanks a lot. Okay, great. Anybody else getting beat up by the pollen yet besides me? It's coming. No, I did hit yesterday. I did hit yesterday. I left yesterday afternoon all of a sudden. I usually do not have allergy problems, but my eyes were burning. And then this morning, the voice got even deeper, which is not necessarily a good sign. All right, so I know what here's the way I'd like to do it. I'm going to go on and go through rigor, reproducibility, and transparency. And it's a very interesting, and then we're going to circle back and we're going to kind of touch up again the ideas of p-value, power, and design, and the logic, and I promise you there is logic in it. The last of the four components in rigor, reproducibility, and transparency actually focuses on design of the experiment, the stats in the experiment, the archiving of the data. But to give you the context, and I am being recorded, but the key thing about rigor, reproducibility, and transparency is almost 2 years old now. We had a year where we knew it was coming, and it's very interesting because I've given a lot of talks on it. I've actually done one online course about it. I've done one in-class full semester class on it with Brad Yoder, and Brad could not be here today. He is trying to finish up grants and some departmental responsibilities. And it's a very hard concept because what NIH has focused on is 4 areas that they believe could greatly strengthen research. And there is a perception. Notice and please understand, you have to be careful when I say this. There's a perception that what is being published in the literature cannot be reproduced. Now, the reason I say it's a perception is when I have talked to individuals, when you say to reproduce an experiment, what do you even mean? What do you mean? And there is a lack of clearness with regard to what does it, we know what rigor would mean, but what does it mean to be reproducible? And I'm going to take the liberty to try to force a definition upon it. I have no other choice. Okay? What reproducible is not, to me, there's an old Indian proverb, you can never step in the same river twice. Why? River's moving. So where you stepped, technically it's now no longer the same river. New stuff is flowing by, new stuff is approaching. You can't do the same experiment twice because you're not going to have the exact same humidity. You're not going to have the exact same conditions. You can't stop time and back up. Notice that time machine. But that's not what we need to be defining reproducibility as. What we mean is, do we give it, have we set it up such that if I had to sit down and walk everybody through exactly what happened, Is it documented, and have we done everything to have done it correctly? Okay? The 4 pillars, before I even start, there are 4 pillars. Repeat these over and over. There's this concept of scientific premise. There's this concept of sex and other biologic variables being introduced into the experience. Like in context, kind of disjunct, don't they? Authentication of chemical and biological resources. Well, that's the Rigor industry. And then we bring in statistical rigor. So there are 4 very diffuse concepts that we're talking about. Try to build a undergraduate class around those 4 distinct. I mean, for Yoder's class, we had to bring in 4 different experts to even make it work. Okay, but you only get 1 of me today. So, what is this? Well, when I teach the class, I pull it away from the NIH mandate. I say, we're just talking about how to do rigorous studies. And when you're designing a study, these are things that you should consider. But since I'm going just to pull the Band-Aid off and tell you the truth, our first endeavor into all of this was really due to the new NIH mandates that these things have to be accounted for when you're putting in a grant. Okay? And furthermore, all fellows, T32, K awardees, F awardees, have to have documented training in this. Like we're setting that up so that we show these things. But what it comes up with is there was this article written by Dr. Collins about NIH plans to enhance reproducibility. And in that, they actually laid out what's going on, those 4 pillars, and also their concerns about things not being reproducible in the literature. Again, let's talk about what that may be. So that was set up, and it was published, and it's a very short read, very good read. Then we had in 2015 these notices. These things would be included in the review grants. Okay, let's clarify something real quick. Scientific premise is scored. I have a study section this afternoon, conference call, at 2 o'clock. They have laid out. We've got to discuss what's the scientific premise. Do we believe it's solid? Do we believe it's there? I'll tell you what they believe. Okay? It's much more than a limit. Much more. Then the other scoreable things, have you at least discussed sex, age, other things that are biological variables that could alter the results of your experiment? Give you context of that. Statistical rigor, score, that's why I'm on the call. They didn't call me to say, really, hey, how good is that scientific premise? They're calling me in. The reason I got called 2 days ago is we got 2 that we really need statistician. But the 4th one, the authentication, is not scoreable. It doesn't get scored. It's a separate document, and you lay out, and I'll give you a good teaching example of what do they really mean that you should make it something good. It may or may not apply, but that's not scoreable. But first, you can't submit it without putting a document up for it. You can't submit it, which is like amazing. And most of the people are putting in the document, we're not using chemical or biological resources, therefore this does not apply. And if that's the truth, it's said jointly. But if you are, you've got to have much more depth. Well, this is produced by this company, so it's okay. That's not what they're doing. Right? So that gives you some context. We're going to go and walk through it. Like I just said, I'm really good about thinking ahead and not moving the slide before I talk about it. So this is exactly it. How they are introduced. Now, let's put NIH aside for a minute. Are these good things or are these bad things? from a scientific perspective, how do we teach and how do we regulate ourselves? Ooh, I hate that word. But how do we keep ourselves from getting sloppy is a question. How do we keep ourselves from getting sloppy? And there's a reason to kind of have these fences and these breaks because we are all trying to do so much. And as you increase the production, how do you maintain the quality? If you want to just go with the business application. This is what it's getting down to. How do we do and how do we conduct and demonstrate we have solid, good science? That's all this is about. But this is the key thing. It's in the scoring now. And like I just told you, I just went through that slide. The significance is the scientific premise there within the approach. Robust and unbiased approach. That is statistical jargon, folks. Okay, that when you hear unbiased, robust, they're asking, are we going to come in and are we going to be using randomization? That would help us to get, hopefully, to unbiased. We're not using randomization. How are we controlling for covariates? How are we accounting for these things in the design? Robust, what statistical assumptions are you making? Are you checking them? And if you are, if they fail, what's plan B? One of the key things in the stats write-up, so I always say is, if people will say, well, I can't commit until I see the data. Yes, you can. You can lay out the whole statistical analysis with all of its branches. What they want to see is how are you going to choose branch A versus branch B? Key thing. That's why consulting, it's interesting because this one thing has really helped me concentrate more on team science in the sense that there are certain things, chemical, authentication of chemical and biological resources, it's not that big. I have zip training on that. None. But I'm being called upon to help people address it. And I have no other ability than to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, I need some advice here. I got a colleague who's doing this. I got somebody on campus who's doing this. Do you have a template? Or do you have some? And we do have all of this stored. Key fact, all of this is stored in the CCTS webpage. We've pretty much built a library of resources to help you with all of this. All right? Then we have examples. So this is where we go. Again, I've kind of raced ahead. The rigorous experimental design is where we go for the robust and unbiased results. Biologic variables, where is that coming from? Anybody have a context for where that's coming from? I've never conducted a human trial, phase 3 clinical trial, that we did not control for gender. Unless we have a really good reason, such as we're studying a disease that is specific to a gender. Where does this come from? And this all animal. And when I gave this talk down in Auburn back on December 1, everybody loved it except the ag school. And I mean, they lined up. They pretty much blocked the door before I was walking out. And they said, do you know that you're pretty much doubling the cost of our research? And you have no idea how much it costs to cage these. And I said, you're right, I don't see your budgets. But I didn't say you've got to design an experiment. I did not say you've got to design an experiment separately for male and female mice or animals. We have to see if there is variability. And the only way to see if there is variability is to include both. But it's very common for the animal studies that I've designed over the years. They're giving 64 male mice or rats. And the question becomes, is that reasonable? We would never do that in human research. Why are we doing this in our preclinical? Okay, so that's that. So I'm going to go and ruin my slide. When you think about chemical, so who bakes in here? Anybody bake this thing? Nobody's looking. Everybody's looking like I've lost my mind. Thank you. My daughters, I have 3 daughters, and they like on certain Saturdays for Dad to get up and make homemade pancakes. One of the things that you have to do to make really good pancakes, the ones that really fluff out, right? You take what's called double acting baking powder. So first it releases CO2 when it hits liquid, and then when it gets hot enough, the batter gets hot enough, another chemical reaction occurs, and here comes another burst of and so you get another reaction and you get really fluffy. It's like cake. That's why they like them. Yeah, I do put a lot of sugar in it. But before I do it, I take a pinch and I drop it in the water. Because if it doesn't foam, what? It's old. It's old and it's useless. That's what they're asking for. And when they say authentication of chemical and biologic resources, they're saying, have you done the basic things to confirm that your cell lines are what you think they should be? That the antibodies are doing what you think they should be doing. Okay? Or if you're using chemicals, do you know if they're old or not? And set up a schedule to come. Do you know if your cell line is contaminated? So those are the things that they're going at. And then let's get to scientific premise. See, that was good. Working back to it. I knew where I was going on that. Scientific premise. What do you think a scientific premise is? What are you drinking a lot of? What do you think it is? How many of you, we've all done lit reviews, right? Is it a lit review? First piece of it is a lit review. It does have the indication that you reviewed the literature, but you're going to find the key pieces or the key publications that underpin why your research needs to be done. But not only that, you have to be able to say, what are the gaps in the literature? What was very successful and good about the previous publications? And what was not so good? We are not encouraging you to throw stones. You can be very careful in the way you explain it. You can be very professional. But to indicate that if these experiments were only done in male, that another study needs to be conducted accounting for the variability of male and female. The other thing that people do is they get it so you're kind of finding the strengths and the limitations. It's almost the way I truly envision it, or that I think about it when I'm writing a grant, is what we do at the end of a journal publication. When we're ready, what do? We write a section in the paper that says, the strengths of this were X, Y, and Z. But I acknowledge the following limitations, A, B, and C. You're doing the exact same thing in your scientific premise. You're doing exactly that. You're finding the literature, you're summarizing the strengths, you're summarizing the weaknesses, and you're showing why what you're about to do doesn't complete the bridge, but at least gives us another step in the bridge toward hopefully a viable solution for research findings. I had a thought, and I think I lost my thoughts. Oh, thoughts back. Don't think it's just the literature. Get over that really quick. It's more than you going into the literature. Everybody has preliminary results in their grant application. You need one preliminary experiments. You need to talk about the strengths of your preliminary results, the limitations. So all of that falls under the scientific premise. And I'll be very honest, I have kind of massaged that. I sit on the study section. I know what it means. I remember when it used to be, you're about to fly, and you've done all your reviews, but you're supposed to have your reviews done, and you fly them all done yet. And they used to send us the paper copies. It was dreadful. You'd see this massive FedEx box on your desk, and you knew exactly what it was, hundreds of pages. Now, you just log in. You just log in and download it and you read it on your computer. Or if And that's only if you've got a fly. You go log in and have it read and don't store it anywhere. But the reason I'm saying this is because it's all gone electronic. You better believe reviewers search for key phrases. When it's time to evaluate statistical power, everybody searches for power. And if it's not there, that's a red flag. I know, because I've talked to people on study session. They're searching for the phrase scientific premise. So, if they're doing it, use it to your advantage. Make a declarative statement. You know, the scientific premise of this investigation is based upon the following literature. Boom, you've got them to that paragraph. I've even encouraged people to have a header that says scientific premise. You put it in your approach, and to go from there.
So I guess I've never really understood what exactly is the distinction between the background and approach and the scientific premise. Is it more just sort of adding this language? Because most of the time you have these elements.
Yeah, I think what it is everybody puts those elements there, but there's not the 2 to 3 sentences that is the articulation of this is where the shortcomings were. This is how I'm going to overcome them. I've got to address them. So it's those pieces there. But of all of this is the one that I think has had the least pushback. Honestly, right? This is one that everybody says, well, we do the majority of that always. We've been doing that for years, and that's the truth. It's kind of, I would argue, focusing the microscope and saying, this is where the limitations are. Okay? And the rigor of the previous experimental designs is the key thing. So I've already kind of blown this away, and I probably should tell you that. I'll tell you, there are some very good review articles that I can send to each of you and get Gene to send them to you that will help very well with the biological, sexes of biological variable, as well as the authentication of resources. And they're all these links are on the CCTS webpage. You just go directly there. You hit grant support for grant help. Second one down, rigor and reproducibility. And it is a ton. I'll pull it up at the end of this and show it to you. It's a ton of resources. But one of the things is this is primarily talking about cell lines. Primarily talking about other things because there's an estimate that in one of the review articles that they haven't found the max. They found the limit. That they believe at least 15% of the preclinical studies using cancer cell lines, 15% of those cell lines are either contaminated or benign. Now, why in the world would you be testing new chemotherapy agents on benign cells? But that's what some individuals in the literature have pointed out or have raised the flag. I'll show you where you can find those resources. So they come in and they talk about the Western blot, all these other things, chemical staining, all of these things. Like I've said, I'm being recorded. Like I've said before, I have to rely on team science here. You know, I've been in a lab one time in my 21-year career. I went to find a graduate student and help them with their dissertation. That's all I've ever done in a lab. I've walked in, talked to a student, and walked out. I don't have a clue what goes on in a lab. Done. I need other people to help me here with this. I can give you teaching examples. I can review the literature. But the key thing here is if you're using cell lines, or you're using chemical resources, how do you know what you're using is actually valid stock? And if you're doing antibodies or anything, how do you know they are doing what they're supposed to do? How do you come in? And here's the kicker about this. This is where everybody gets slaughtered. You don't write on this page, day one, I'm going to do the following things. This will not stop you from being funded. It will stop you from receiving. Until they're happy, they won't release the funds. But what they're looking for is a schedule to be able to say, every 3 months or every 6 months, I am going to circle back and utilize this protocol again. I'm going to have a standard operating procedure where I come in and confirm over and over throughout the life of my experiment, nothing has contaminated, nothing's gone stale, everything's still the properties that we got a new batch in, we're going to test to make sure that it's acceptable. Also, has to be a schedule. It's more than just, okay, on day one, this is how we're going to check this box. They want to see a schedule. All right, it's a separate document. This is probably, I've gotten probably, a lot of different phone calls from my desk right before grants are supposed to, David, what's this dang document? And I'll say, you're a psychologist, you're not doing anything with this. What you need to do, you've got to take 1 page, type in there, based upon these hypotheses, due to the nature of this research and the hypotheses being tested, we are not using chemical or biologic resources. Period. It goes right through. But if you're playing with cells, or if you have chemical reagents, or if you are dealing with a specific strain of genetically engineered mice, how do you know? How do you confirm? Okay? That's the whole catch there. This is, again, consideration of sex, but catch here, this is a lot with regard to animals, but you got to also understand, I don't envy animal researchers. I think it's harder than actually human research. The problem with human research is you got to come in. That's the problem with human research. The problem with the animals, as I've done this, I've learned that, the time of day and the nature of the lights and the humidity in the room can make the animals behave much different. So it's harder to come up with a controlled experiment, in my opinion. But we also have to be able to understand, think about this. Sometimes the key information, somebody trying to reproduce research, if you don't tell me the age of the animals, then you've got an unknown confounder out there. So this is when we say sex, we also talk about age. Somebody brought up, well, in a human study, race. Oh, I haven't done a human study that I didn't control for race. I've never done a human study that I didn't control for race. But if we're talking about different things, these are the types of things, especially if you're involved in animal research. How many people are doing animal research? Can you give me some examples of things that might come into play? Are you mad at me for doubling the size of your research?
No, because I think, like you said, you don't have to repeat every single experiment. You can just validate in a key experiment.
That's exactly right.
And so it's not really doubling. It may be just a very small.
That's what I'd recommend.
Increase. But the genetic backgrounds, different strains of mice behave differently, especially, in my area, susceptibility to smoke and emphysema development. So those things have to be accounted for.
And documented. And I think that's the key thing to keep in mind as you're seeing a little bit of that. It's really about documenting it and justifying it. Scientific premise is the justification. The rigor is the rest of it. The authentication, and the status, consideration of these things. All right? If this is not there, because this is, so this again, I'll be very blunt. I do have a study this afternoon on the study section that they are doing female only. And I have flagged it. And the way it works on study section is everybody, number 1 reviewer speaks, number 2 reviewer speaks, statistician speaks, and then we all kind of mold, we throw our scores down, then we meld it together, we hear everybody's concern, and then we all re-vote, or we throw our new scores out, and then the committee votes based on our range. Because the reviewers are to set the range. I flagged it. It is female only. Now, the researchers did not ever justify why it's female only. It is clearly a study that can be justified for female only. This is what I will say. It's clearly you can justify it. But just because you can do it, should they be allowed to go forward when they didn't do it? Okay? So, but I'm willing to bet I get pushback on that today. But I'm still going to raise that flag and say, hey, now this is the part that I love. This is home plate to me. This is where I feel safest. So it's when they come in, and again, this has been going. I've been on study sessions since 2003. I think as I remember, it was 2003, because I was at study section the night that George W. Bush got reelected, and going to bed that night, and Carrie had not. What's the term? Conceded. That's the one I wanted. That's it. He had not, but he did the next morning. And everybody was on pins and needles. Oh, we gotta go through this again. So the only reason I'm brought into that study section, I read the whole thing, but I'm there to say, can I replicate the power calculation? That's why I got the problem. Very nice study. The guy was very apologetic. Dr. Redden. I said, nobody calls me that. They call me David. Okay, David, I need your help. In 10 days, we've got a handful that's got to be reviewed. We can't get a statistician. Can you step up and get this done? Yeah, I'll do that for you. But I was called in to look at all these things. This is my checklist. Are they using randomization? And if so, be careful. Don't just say I'm going to be using randomization. You got to be a lot more careful now. Are you stratifying? If you are, stratifying on what? And what's the scientific premise for stratifying on that? Randomization, blinding. Are we going to replicate if we need replication? The methods, again, some people will say, you can't write an analysis plan until you see the nature of the data. That's not true. I can easily say, I will begin by examining histograms and normal probability plots. If the data appears normal, then I'll use a 2-sample t-test. We'll check assuming unequal variances. Otherwise, if the data is highly skewed, I will turn around and I'll use the appropriate parametric procedure. That makes people feel a lot better because only statisticians can write that. And it's nice to have the fingerprints of different experts on a grant application. So we'll get into this a little bit more, but this one drives me insane. Corey is all over how missing data will be true. Well, that's still a fledgling science. I think what we have to say in those sections is to be able to say we're keenly aware of it, we're going to do our best to minimize it, and then that we will use different techniques and compare the robustness of those techniques. That's the way I get out of it. So here's a key table. The key table is showing you, okay, it applies to all applications. This only applies to those that have it, but you still gotta, even if you're not doing it, you gotta upload the document. Here's where you're supposed to find it. So you're supposed to have the scientific premise in the research and the significance. We're looking for the scientific rigor and the approach, and that's a new attachment. And then will it impact the overall score? The first three, yes. The last one's no. He said no. Okay. But they will not release the funds until they're happy. But that doesn't go into this global criteria. Now, this is one of my favorite ones because I do think there are some issues in science in research. What would you believe, or how would you react if I told you that I had a clinical trial several years ago, came in, did the first, we got all the final results, did all the analysis as well, that all like good. And I said to the investigator, you got to feed on your primary hypothesis after controlling for all the variants indicates that the treatment is significant. The p-value is 0.052. joy out of, oh my gosh, I didn't get a significant, didn't get below 0.051. The person actually said to me, well, can we throw in more code? You can't. No, that's wrong. When you've seen the p-value and now you start wanting to modify, now you're playing a dangerous game. And that's why there's a lot of statisticians out there who say the vast majority of what's published statistically is wrong because we've been overfitting. And I cannot disagree. But this was a very interesting paper that you can find on the webpage with us. And I know this because I've seen all of these all over the place throughout my career. Hypothesis myopia. In other words, you're pig-headed. You're convinced. Nothing's going to convince you, no matter what the data says, that your belief or your research hypothesis is wrong. You're not approaching the experiment open-minded. I have an individual on this campus that if we fail to achieve statistical significance, the first thing out of this person's mouth consistently, I could win 1,000 bets with this. Oh, the study is underpowered. No, you don't know that. He is never wrong. It is, oh, I'm right, we just haven't proven it yet. Can't have that mentality. You got to be open-minded. You know, like this happened. This is more of a graduate student problem. The Texas sharpshooter is you give them a graph of data, and by God, they'll be able to find a pattern in there, even if there is no pattern. In other words, straining to create results. Don't do that. This is where the design is supposed to come in. You're supposed to set it up to the best of your ability and follow it. I am so guilty of this. I am terribly guilty of this. Asymmetric extension is the one where I just explained it to you from the example of the 0.152. Oh, let's add more. Oh, this doesn't make sense. The results don't make sense. Let's go in now and start seeing what if we look at nails? What if we look at if that was all pre-planned? You're fishing. And where I'm really bad about it is that it's just the opposite. A lot of people will say, okay, I did not achieve the p-value I wanted to. Let's add more covariance, or let's go in, and you start really focusing on it when it's not significant to try to figure out why. I'm really bad about if the p-value is below 0.05, check, pass it through, let's publish it, instead of backing up and slowing down and saying, hey, are we certain that there isn't some other influence going on here that caused significance? So, getting expected results in the past, giving unexpected results, and inquiring more. The Joe So storytelling, that's happened all the time. This is retrofitting your explanation to the data. You set out to do this experiment, it comes out completely different than what you thought, and then you sit down and you start thinking, you come up with a new hypothesis, and oh my gosh, guess what? This data matches my new hypothesis. Well, that's backwards. You can't do it. Okay? Otherwise, you may just be interpreting random noise. How do you overcome them? This has reviewed very well, actually. Being able to, you've got a limited number of pages, but I typically do, especially for the statistical rigor, produce a letter of support that says we're going to implement as much as this of this new tool, where we're going to try to say, hey, can we consider, is there another explanation that may fit the data better? And if so, let's talk about it. But we declare it up front. We don't declare it after. We say, we believe this is what the best research idea we have. We're going to conduct this experiment. There is also another possible mechanism in place. We will consider that also. The pre-commitment, we always do that. The problem with it is, are you faithful to it? You can't help but laugh when somebody decided to put the wedding ring there. the engagement rate, is if you've stated your analysis plan, follow it. I don't like the phrase rivals, but I will say this: if I've done a very complicated analysis, I'll hand that data set over to somebody else and say, you take a look at it. Give me an hour of your time. Let me see if you're coming anywhere close to the strategy I came up with and the results. Can an independent methodologist with the same instructions come to the same results? And the blinded data analysis is very much that, but it's a degree more. And not so much that it's blind. I'll pass it over and say, this is the group that received drugs, this is the group that received, this one got drug A, this one got drug B. This is much different. This is where we don't even tell people what the groups are. We don't even say drug A, drug B. Keep it completely blind. And let them go through and see what they get, and at the end of the study, lift the blind, and that's it. It's very much the way we handle it with DSMBs. Okay? All of these are good things. Catch that. Here's something, and again, this is the other thing. Like, you always remember, everybody thinks so much of this. I always pull my experience. Study section, do you know the majority of the time that people get criticized statistically, it has nothing to do with power of the analysis plan? There's no data management plan. Where are you going to store that data? How are you going to make certain that data is clean? Who's putting the data in? How often are we're teaching you now to come in and check on your chemical reagents and your other biologic biologic resources, but what about the quality of the data? How often are you going in? How are you addressing unusual observations? All of that has to be there. Always include a management plan and clearly delineate the analysis plan. Most of the time, the criticism and grants is they didn't talk about how they're going to handle data management, how you're going to know the data is clean. Okay? Here's something else. And I've told this story, and this is a true story. 7 years after publishing a paper, came in my collaborations, some of the collaborations that I've had, they go, it's not that I collaborate for a year and people go away. I've been working with some people for 20 years now, helping them with studies. 7 years after publishing a primary finding of a clinical trial, I come in to find an email from the PI who got an email from the document review saying, we would like if you could give us the following summary information and a p-value and adjust that primary analysis. If you have it, adjust the primary analysis for this to see. It's 7 years ago. 7 years ago. Where's the data? Who's got it? Where's the database? Where's the archive? That's the definition of reproducibility. There's a key definition. After it's all said and done, is there an archive that has everything in it that can show and demonstrate where the results came from? Yeah, I had the archive. I went directly to it. I fired up the SAS program that was stored with the final analysis data set that was named Final Analysis Data Set, so that I easily identify it immediately, and I was able to do it. But I know there have been other studies on this campus that there was no way they could ever do it because nobody took the time to build the archive. The archive's the key thing. So always think about that. And look, I am the type of guy, okay, I'm the type of guy, I don't believe I have to do everybody's power calculations. I may be useful in coming in and confirming that you put in everything that's needed to allow somebody to replicate it. I don't believe I have to do everybody's analyses. I think allowing people to come in and do some analyses are always a good idea, but most of the time, non-statisticians or non-methodologists are using a graphical user interface, or what some people call a GUI, where you point and click and you say, okay, I want to do the two-sample t-test, I'm going to assume equal variance. The danger there is 7 years from now, are you going to remember where you pointed and where you clicked. Wording will probably be completely different. The methods will be the same. The thing is be careful about graphical user interfaces. See if there is the ability to turn on a syntax editor that will record what's actually, what the pointing and clicking is just generating code in the background. And when you hit the button, you hit the run statement in the code. Can it be recorded? If not, work with a statistician to be able to at least articulate it very clearly in a written document what all went down. When I do it, I always program in SAS or R, so that script is stored somewhere to be able to go back and get it. Just be careful of that, because to me, reproducibility is the idea. 3 years from now, can you open the archive, pull everything up, and still see that PDOT that was published, and show them exactly what went on? Now, there's been pushback on this. You know why? About the idea of reproducibility is because some researchers have been able to come in, look at other individuals' code, and then start throwing stones in the sense of, oh, no, this is an error, this is an error. That's not really what this is supposed to be about. This is supposed to be about transparency, so people can be able to, if they're going to do or try to build off of your results, do they completely understand what you've done? That's the key thing. Please keep in mind, I said paper. I do this for abstracts. I do this for I do this for, if I got a grant application, I put preliminary results in. Archive. If it's about to be submitted outside your office, have an archive. Make sure you've got what the abstract, the data, the program, everything that you need in one folder, and have it in multiple places. Have it on the server somewhere backed up that you've got access to, as well as other places. At the end of the study, I have the archive, I have an archive on a secure server, and I give an archive to the PI. And make sure that they're all together. So I can give you a case study of a very big study here, where I know if somebody said, hand over the final data set, I know for a fact because somebody was using a graphical user interface manipulating the data. We can't guarantee that we know what is the final data set that was published. I know that. Okay. I always like to pass a blinded data set. And the other thing is just to have, and that's one of the utilities of the bird unit, the bird group that meets here every week. You can bring in a set of results and say, before I publish it, is there something here that maybe I should have looked at? Is there an assumption I didn't think about? Just do it as a team science approach. Would you have done it this way? Are there other robust techniques? And then the other thing, this is going really far. This is the other thing that's really been developed, and I really fully expect SAS and the other ones to really step up. What they're doing now is the statistical software is getting so advanced to the point that technically you can literally put the paper in the program, the computer program, and then where a table is produced, you see the code, the data set, everything that was necessary to create that table. Where a graph falls in the paper, you see the instructions given to the computer to create that graph with regard to what data set it was accessed. So it will tell you what directory it's under, everything, what server it's on, everything. So those are pretty cool things. I find that to be a little bit of overkill. And it's complicated code, but that's where the field is going to create what they mean by reproducible documents. Okay? So reproducible means am I giving them everything that they need to either find the results that I published, or if they want to be able to go and try to recreate the experiment. I said recreate or reproduce the experiment. When you reproduce the experiment, you're not guaranteed to get the same results. There'll be variation. We would hope that they're in the same ballpark, the same magnitude. But at that point, you say random experiment. There's randomness to it. All right. In fact, what I'm going to do about this Let's go right here. Can you see? So I just told you a minute ago, this is where the library is. I just hit it. So the different slide decks that you might want to see, there are videos. We come down through here and we keep going, and we've got a lot of different things. Here we go. With regard to cell lines, fixing problems within cell lines, a database of cross-contaminated and misidentified cell lines where you go double check. With regard to antibodies, overview of studying both sexes. I need to get my stat stuff in. I have it in the historic perspective. So there's all these things that you can use, okay, to go and get more information. In all the articles that, if you're interested in all of that. And with that, I'm through rigor and reproducibility. With 4 minutes to spare for the byline questions. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually do this. We're going to take a break. Then the next hour or so, if you've got questions about Pablo we want to discuss or p-values, things like that, we can back up and discuss those. Okay. Any questions on rigor and reproducibility? You want to take a break, and if you have questions, let's talk about it. If not, go on. All right.
Yeah, it's on the 14th.
I think you called me one day, I was trying to get the thing is.
No problem. I believe I'm about to do it. Go ahead.
So we got it in, but this part I had no idea about because I was in the
No, I'm sorry about that.
It's not, I should think about it.
That's fine. I mean, if they come back, I think it's okay.
But I actually just did it with a little paragraph.
It's fine.
Really, like you said, I thought it was kind of redundant, but
But it is.
And or if.
It is a little redundant.
Yeah.
Right. No one's gonna ask. The preliminary data doesn't really have to do too much data, but but I was probably, isn't there a thing today?
You got the word, yeah. Right. Are they rejecting your methodology?
A little bit.
You want to bring it in here? Yeah, it's from 11 to 1. 11 starts at, excuse me, I think it's 11:30 to 1:30. And you got
31.
11:30 to 1, and you got free lunch. Bring it on. All right. All right.
I guess one thing I was going to ask, so we're doing cell architecture.
Mm-hmm.
And so the raw data, I mean, it's just piles and piles. But then
You need both. And I did not make that clear. I always have the raw data, and then I have the analysis ready. Is there any way to compress it? Is there any way? And if you only have, if all you can do is store the analysis ready, at least have the analysis ready.
right. So I have all that, but we did it through Excel.
Fine. As long as Excel is reproducible.
Right. So that's good. Just can't kind of reach around.
We got a lot of people bringing their data in Excel, and I pull it into SAS and analyze it from there. Okay. Those two things we are talking about. Right.
I'll see if once he has one way or another.
that side. Oh, yeah. Really trying to be hands off, but you know what, I had to be around something. I got trauma after a week. She's a selection. Yeah. She's okay. Nothing's going on. No, she can continue on the plan. It's going to 2 years. And yeah, manage patients too. You know, the nurses say, you know, what about this or about this, you know? It's like, yeah, but if the nurses don't know what to do, then she doesn't know what to do. Yes, I can. I said, hey, you want to do the central line? She said, central line. Nurse surgery comes in and says, work on the water. I said, okay, wait, it's 20 minutes. Injury may have it. You need to do this. Fine. So that always, no less than 20 minutes. Okay. So it's very good. So I get down, she's working on her neurosurgery's there. There you go. They're like, oh, I wasn't ready. And they said, oh, and so they have, you need time. I said, you need hurry. We need to live with that. It's great. That's easy. Anyway. Absolutely. That side of it, kids ITPs behind, and you're doing everything else. You have to expand it through. And so it's designated by I was asleep, and it was because I woke up and just threw them. Yeah, she would turn and there was nothing else. That's how I woke up. It was so and it was like 5 o'clock, so I was like, surely I can't do that. I'm learning how to, yeah. So I played 4 times and I can't stand it. That's what, yeah, so entertainment. I said, they may not order it, but nurse order it. I mean, apparently nurse surgery, even more people wants to make it. Yeah, fell apart. Yeah. So anyway, it was just, I don't know how to convey the sense that you say, you know, stereotypes. Yeah, you can't just say, we're going to do this and then watch the history. You know, obviously not changing. That's what you're going to be. And the nurses have their plan for what to do if this happens or not happens. Well, wait, but
Panel finished yesterday, I had to go to teach class.
I think by now she's close to
yeah, this is the shit. Was there anything like just trying to play attack and be think why would she not? Was there something about the issues? Was that just
I don't know. Like from this and back to when outside, it was really separate here. What was going on with the nurses. I think it's so explained. Rotate a nurse, you know, going, got follow up, going back.
I think there's a great thing to do. Here, something like that. Whatever you think is really good. Because the nurses were saying, that's almost what I'm talking about. So based on the strong team, because they're so good. But I love the what's going to use everything. So now, so they had. This is like $1,000. So sometimes I just my so I think the how this was specific. Right. It's not that exactly like the show that options out. Yeah, he was a it's clear that he's not having so that's nice that he's like so he needs to get this one when you want to create so I think so more sections with 500 so it's a bunch of interventions. No, I don't actually have so it makes it, it's not. That's why I think I should look at that. It's hard because you just I just get the problems that she's yes, it is. Be committed to her rights. That's
All right, like I said, technically, so there's nothing like having spring break. And the funny thing is next week is spring break from here, so I'm not even, especially when you can line these things up, they don't. Before we go before spring break, we schedule one on power, and we try to get a few values. The thing about overview lectures is, I can't teach you how to do a power calculation. What I want to do is teach you to understand what it is and when do you need it. So I'll just go back and kind of refresh that and then ask if y'all have any questions with regard to power or things that y'all may have run into if you're trying to do power calculations, so I can give you some advice. And also, you can always reach out to me. That's like I often joke, they don't keep me on the campus because of my personality. They keep me on the campus because I can write a power calculation and I know how to get it done. So, when do you need a power calculation? When? When do you start worrying about your power calculations? Do you need one for a pilot study? No. Don't, if you're doing a pilot study, don't think that you need a power calculation. Pilot studies are designed to give you preliminary information that enables you to design a future experiment. You should not be using a p-value at the end of a pilot study. When do you need a power calculation?
You're comparing two or more groups.
Or even maybe you're only working with one group. If you don't have to say two or more. But when you go to a power calculation, when you're going to use a p-value to justify your conclusion, if you put down a p-value, I've got the right to say, oh, you used a statistical method. What was your power to detect an effect? Then it falls back on you because you're the one that's supposed to be able to say, I consider this to be a clinically relevant effect. So that what I'm trying to get you to say to me is, you don't start worrying about a power calculation until you've got your hypotheses. You worry about that. You worry about your power calculation after you've got your specific aims down. In the absence of a specific aim, I can do no analyses. Without the analyses, I get no p-value. So since my power is completely dependent upon my analytic approach, which is completely dependent upon your hypotheses, the first thing you bring to me is not a request for a power calculation. The first thing you come to me to say, these are my aims, these are my goals. Can we discuss them? Can I get you to understand specifically? Now, I'm not trying to insult my own intelligence. I need you to teach me what's the nature of your outcome. Teach me the nature of your science, and then I can bring it toward a power calculation. Yes.
So in thinking of the pilot study, I understand that the primary aim is feasibility. But it almost doesn't make sense to me, especially when it takes so much time and money to do something like that, to not at least look at the effect that it's having. And in order
I didn't say that you can't look at the effect.
I know,
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said don't put a p-value on it.
But to that end, I mean, do you not upfront need to think about your numbers in terms of being able to make a meaningful comparison?
In a pilot study, I don't try to make a meaningful comparison in a pilot study.
Just
What I try to do is, when somebody comes to me to design a pilot study, if they have said, give me aims to test, I slash it and I say to estimate. Okay, we're not to testing yet. Testing means you've worked out all your clinical, you've got all your standard operating procedures worked out, you've gone through the whole thing, you've designed it out, and now you're ready to do it. In a pilot study, we're trying, if we're putting people through an exercise regimen, you don't want girls, an exercise regimen, I need to know that at least 80% of people going through the study, doing it, say that can complete it, and they'll show up for week 6 visit after you make them go through it. Those are the types of things I'm estimating and making sure that these things work out. Yes, I'm gathering data from it, and I'm calculating statistics. Primarily, I'm calculating how much variability there is, but those are to be used to inform the future study. You see what I'm getting to? I'm summarizing that. I'm not saying that you're not using the data. I'm saying that you're not using that data in a manner to say, I've done enough to declare or to be ready to see if a difference exists.
So how do you go about determining an
A sample size for pilot.
Right.
And that's the greatest question of all time. Typically, I will come in on either through precision. I also use time as a big thing. If nobody needs to be doing 5-year time. Nobody does a 5-year time. Let's make that perfectly clear. But if you think you have a year to do it, I will say, give me as many as you can within a year or so to get me in. But usually I try to refrain to keep my pilots down into a 20 to 30% range at most. Because what I'm doing is I'm refining the procedures of these people. So I don't want to use too many. Does that make sense?
Right, so it really follows from what you estimate.
Yes, exactly right. In the time frame.
Yeah, that's my question is, effectively, can you do a power calculation with a pilot to make sure the data set that you have is going to be large enough to adequately inform?
If I have, you see, we do a lot of pilots with CTS, and I have to tell people, if you come in and tell me you're going to be doing 3,000 people, you're not going to pilot those. A pilot is not an underfunded RO. Make ourselves very clear. Okay, a pilot is not a rehashed RO1 that didn't get funded, so I'm going to try to float it to this next one. Not going to work. Backfires. What I will do is, if you are completely content with you've done all your homework and you run 20 people and you haven't messed with the definition of your outcome, I can design the study to say, given we have enrolled the first 20, how many more do I need? I can do that type of power calculation. Okay, an interim power calculation. Okay, it's called an internal pilot. But that has to be decided upfront. And the big key is you don't give it. You've got to be certain that your outcome is not going to be changed, and that you're not changing anything with your experimental design. So the answer to that is yes, but typically before we have power calculation. And what is power? What is it? my favorite one. It's not an exact measurement. It's a guess. Remember, this is the key thing I want to show you. Always remember, power is just imagining two curves. That's all you're doing. Okay? All you're doing is you're imagining two curves. This one's under the all. This is the one that says there's no research effect whatsoever. The reason this guy shifts is because you're hypothesizing a research effect. And because of that, you have literally shoved the distribution over a little bit. But to declare statistical significance, you've got these green bars. All power is how much of this hypothetical distribution under the alternative, how much of that is above the green line, how much of that area under the curve. That's all it is. So as you imagine you're going to have bigger and bigger effects, this gets to be moved over. And that is an indication of power is really high. That's it. The rest, that's the fundamental belief, that's the fundamental concept of power, is you have to conduct the experiment under the belief that the null is true. There it is. These are the bars generated under the belief the null is true. But what happens if you have an effect? Well, that distribution is going to shift. How much of it is being shifted into what's called the rejection regions? That's it. That's plan. Every power calculation I ever do, it's always that. It's that concept. That it may not be a bad. It could be a different distribution. But it's always how much is falling above the significance cut point. Okay? What's a p-value?
The evidence.
Thank you. Evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. Evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. What is it technically? Probably observing the data. Or data more extreme, under what? Under which of those two distributions? Over my shoulder. The null or the alternative? The null is always under the null. Just please do me a favor. Never interpret a p-value as the probability the hypothesis is correct. That's not it. And don't interpret it as the probability of truth. Probability of truth. Okay? All right? I'm going to let y'all go early unless y'all got questions. I'll stay around. But unless y'all got specific things that y'all want to go over. I mean, those are the fundamental pieces that you really got to have out of stats. Yeah.
I have a question, sir. Is it ever okay to recalculate the power of output in the study?
Yes, it's done all the time. It is done. There is a whole branch of power calculations called conditional power. So I'm 50% of the way there. I've got 50% of my sample, and I want to know what's my power today. But there has to be, just like a standard power calculation, there has to be assumptions. Let me ask you something. How many of you are baseball fans? We have no baseball fans in this room. So here's one of the things I've always joked about, okay? If you follow baseball, and we get down into October, and let's just say, well, because it's not going to be reasonable to hypothesize the Braves. Let's say the Cubs are 15 games ahead in the lead in the Central. They're 15 games ahead of their next competitor, and there are 10 games to go. What do you know? They're 15 games ahead, and there's only 10 games left. What do you know?
They can't fall behind.
They can't fall behind. The game is over. It's over. It's done. There are times that we need to look at the data and be able to say, wait, this is so big, I've got to stop it. It's I so poorly predicted my clinical effect is so much bigger that there is a justification to call the game early and stop. The reverse is true also. Okay? There's no need for the only reason the second place team is playing the remaining 10 games is because they have to. if I have an experiment and I'm halfway there and I come in and I calculate my conditional power, and my conditional power is down to 20%, do I need to keep going? No, because the bottom line is there's starting to be evidence that there is no clinical effect, and we need to report that. The reason you do conditional power, here's the thing about conditional power though, okay? I'll come in and do conditional power and look at all the assumptions I've made, and I may adjust my variance estimate. If my variance estimate was wrong, and my variance is much smaller than I predicted, I can get away with fewer. So I might, by conditional power, say, we're going to truncate our experiment and decrease our sample size by this amount. I have the ability by looking at the variance that, oh, actually it's a little bit noisier than I thought. I'm going to inflate, I'm going to tell NIH I would like to extend my sample size up to this. I've had that happen plenty of times. What I will not allow you to do is for you to come in and look at the data and go, ooh, that's my new clinical effect size. You cannot do that in an experiment. The variance is a nuisance parameter. That's why pilots are really brought in to estimate variance. I still need you to make a clinical opinion about what's relevant.
There's no penalty for doing that repeatedly.
There is no, I do have to use an adjustment in my calculation of my p-value, but I wouldn't call it a penalty. And not a penalty. It's kind of like it's the same adjustment when you have to do interim analyses. There's an adjustment to it. So it's not too costly an adjustment. Other questions?
So if you're underpowered and you find significance, that means?
If you're all right, so that's a great question. So once you've declared significance, I don't want to talk about power anymore. That's one of the things that helps. Okay. If you think about it, power is in the future. It's what's going to happen as this rolls out. It's a prediction. If the event has occurred, there's no need to talk about predictions anymore. Now the question comes, if you have declared statistically significance and you've got a very small sample size, which would entail being associated with a study that had a design with low power, you've got an imprecise estimate. First of all, you've got an imprecise estimate. So it's very noisy. You could have shot really high and overestimated your effect. And that's the most likely out, and that's called the winner's curse. You hear people say the winner's curse in research. What they're talking about is when you're studying the literature and you're trying to use that to judge your effect sizes, folks, those are all the significant results. You're missing part of the distribution. So you're looking at the winners, and because they were all winners, you're overestimating what you should consider a clinical effect size. You might want to bring it in. Okay? But the danger of a small study that is significant is it's imprecise and maybe a big overestimate.
What software do you recommend for power calculation?
I want to warn you, be careful of what's online. If you're using one online, bring it by one of the statisticians. What we use is we have PASS, which is power and sample size, it's up to version 14, but the departmental perpetual license so that everybody in the department can have it on their computers and access to it. That perpetual license is $11,000. The standalone, you got one computer to put it on is $800. It's an expensive software, but it's very, very good.
Does the pediatric research office have access to that as well? Mm-hmm. Does the pediatric research office?
No, you have access to me. Okay, the PRO has Chichiabon, Baslor, they're all from the biostats department, so they have it on their laptops at all times. So you just figure, the thing is I'm not sure, again, you want to see how it works, we can sit down and do those. If you're going to do something, if you want like a preliminary goal, you can find online, but be very careful. A lot of the online calculators are awful. They're not estimating quite right. there's nothing validated in them. Pass is validated. The other one that people really like is called inquiry, whereas pass is a graphical user interface. But you can say the code, you can say everything, which is very nice. The other one that is inquiry, but it's tabular, so it literally asks you to put in your effect size into the table, put in the standard deviation, and then you type on the array, and then it spits out sample size, or sample size, alpha, variance, effect size. So whatever three you fill in, automatically fills in. Yes?
It's kind of the previous question that you have small sample size and see significance of p-value, and the power is also higher. Can the conclusion that the clinical effect is significant? You said
You can say you have statistically significant evidence. The danger there is, it falls to the clinicians, it falls to the researchers to define what's clinically relevant. Under that condition, I would always report the p-value and the confidence interval. Confidence intervals help people a lot. Some people will say, Dr. David Wine is overkill. They both contain, no, they do not contain the same information. If you get stuck on the idea of, I'm only worried about significance, which is what you should never do. It's a great article from that I got to get on that webpage from the ASA. That's it's foolish to boil all research down to one number. It doesn't make sense. We need graphs. We need confidence intervals. We need the whole toolbox. The confidence interval will tell you how precise that estimate is. You may be significant and very imprecise, which is not as good as powerful and precise. So, because keep in mind, you could have a very powerful study because you're going after something very big, but it's still, you can't tell me how tight, you can't give me a tight bound. Yeah.
let's say when you're doing clinical trial, you have a big sample size.
No, that's different.
But in the middle, you want to assess how the clinical trial, the effect,
Well, the catch there is, under those conditions, at the design stage, if you're going to have an interim look, you can have 5 interim looks, you can have 10 interim looks, but it has to be designed in. So you're allowed to look, but you've got to put it in the analysis plan.
But some early clinical trial, they stop early, was that case. So
Under
you
that
haven't finished all the clinical studies, let's say you only run about half of the patient, you did evaluation at that time on.
Well, you see, what happens under those conditions, there's a book by Jemison and Turnbull, and it's called sequential methods. There's a special method, there are special statistical methods called sequential, so that we're allowed that at a third of the study, if the drug is a home run, if it's massively better than we ever predicted, we will be allowed to come in and look and make a judgment. But it has to be a whopping. It's not being judged at an alpha of a 0.05 level. In fact, you're spending out your alpha like it's a paycheck. So that first look, you go very cheaply, and you use maybe 0.001 of your alpha. But the effects are so big, you've already crossed that threshold. There are data safety monitoring boards that will stop the study and say, publish the results now. And that's what they're doing.
It works the opposite way too, right?
Unfortunately, yes. I've had those studies also where we've gotten all the way through, we're halfway through, and they look at it, and there's no chance of catching significance, so we stop the trial for futility. It's called stopping it for futility. Okay. Yes?
When you talk about confidence intervals, does that, so the 95% confidence interval, does that, and say you're talking about a hazard ratio, does that mean that the numbers that it shows the range of hazard ratios from 2.5 to 97.5% of the patients?
No, not of the
Or
patient. No.
Okay.
That's a great question. What's the correct interpretation of a confidence interval? Well, this is something that's still debated, but there's a simple way to explain it. The 95%, so when I do a hypothesis test for a hazard ratio, okay, what's the null for that? Hazard ratio of 1. There's no difference with regard to the hazards for the two groups. Okay, the alternative is the hazard is not equal to 1. Now I'm going to have to pick between those two. Well, I bring you a confidence interval. The confidence interval runs from 1.5 up to 3.2. Is 1 in that interval? No. 1 is not a hazard ratio that is compatible with the evidence that you just collected. So because 1's not in there, you would reject and declare significance. That's the first primary teaching example. If the value's outside the confidence interval, those values would have to be rejected because they're not compatible from this data set. But now let's take the opposite side of the same coin. I told you it ran from 1.5 to 3.2. Those are the values for which I could not reject the null hypothesis. I chose 2 and tried to do a hypothesis test and said, is the hazard ratio 2 versus the hazard ratio not equal to 2? Well, that was inside that confidence. So that hypothesized value is compatible with this data set. It gives you the range, and it gives you the range from the probability distribution. It gives you the central range from the probability distribution of the hazard ratios that match or would not be rejected from this data set. So it's just showing you the compatible set. That's what I call it. It's the compatible set that goes with the data. Okay?
But what is the range? What is that range? Like when you get a 95% confidence interval.
When I say 95% there, I'm taking 95% of all the values, all the hazard ratio values that we believe are compatible with this. We're taking that centerpiece. That's what I'm doing. Now, let me back up here, okay? That's the way I teach it, okay? So the 95 is just to take that chunk of the probability distribution. I'm taking 95% of the probability distribution to make my judgment. That's all it really means. Now, another way it's taught in introductory classes is suppose you did the experiment 100 times. The 95% means that 95 of those intervals are going to actually capture the true hazard ratio, whatever it may be, whether it's 0, 1, 2, it doesn't matter. As long as the method is valid, 95 out of 100 reported confidence intervals will capture it. My problem is nobody does that experiment 100 times. You do it once.
And so as far as conceptually wise, the confidence interval, the 5% would be outliers.
Yes, well, the 5% of the tails. So be careful not to call it outliers. Okay. The 5% is the extreme pieces of the distribution. Okay. There's 5% that's forced out into the extreme tails. So 5% of that probability distribution is being used to say these things would have to be rejected and not be considered compatible with this data set. Okay? Other questions? No other questions? God will. Appreciate it.
It's interesting you say that. So, and it's part of each curriculum. However, is being brought up is that
you're gonna shut it down. Brian's not gonna be happy with it. I was not very good about staying near the camera.
That's all right.